We are going to move into two more plant families, the Banksias and the Waratahs. Before we did, I just wanted, just in case anyone out there was interested, when I was talking last section about that there are some books out there that may step you through this process of moving into the poetic language of the doctrine of signatures and truly understanding that. One guy who's written a bit about it is Stephen Booner, and he wrote a book called The Lost Language of Plants, among others. There are quite a few books that he's written. So if you're interested, that's perhaps a starting point for you. Okay, so the Banksias. This is kind of a classic Australian iconic plant family, really, isn't it? The Banksias are unique to Australia, and most of them. Their flowers are really unique. They're quite huge and complex, and they come in a variety of different colours, but they're predominantly like the yellows and the creams, moving towards reds and oranges. And the leaf shapes differ with each species. Some of them are shrubs, some of them are trees, but it's really that flower that is so unique to the Banksia. So too is seeds being dispersed after fire. And what we find is quite a lot of our Australian plants that grow in certain habitats around Australia require fire as part of their dispersal method of seeds. And of course that helps the next generation due to the lack of competition for sunlight and the intense nutrient denseness of the ash on the ground, etc. So it's a really useful thing. But it is an interesting doctrine of signatures as well, which I want you to start to think about. There's a certain catalytic aspect to the Banksias when it comes to their healing. They can be really intense. The Baronius, if you remember, has a soft and delicate flower. It looks like it could easily be crushed. The Banksias, however, I'll show you a picture of one while I'm chatting. I mean, look at that flower. That looks like you could snap it off that incredibly thick stem that it's on, jump on it a few times, and it would be fine. You know, there's such strength to that flower. There's such a solidity, like a solid aspect to it. You know, it looks like it's there for the long haul. And looking at that flower in comparison to the other flowers that we've done, what is it that really stands out the most? Well, how does that flower make you feel? And just take a moment to really, I guess, feel into that flower. What are some of the thoughts that are coming up for you? What are some of the ideas? Even before we dive into them, start to think about, what is it that really stands out for me about that flower? Or take it a little bit further. If I'm in a quiet space, what is it that I feel about this flower? Am I strongly attracted to it, or am I repelled by it? What's going on for me in this moment? Or compared to the other flowers, I feel this way. For me, there's such a strength to this flower. It's like and I'm not sure how many of you have been through the Australian bush and have seen Banksias growing wild, but you notice them. For me, I notice them. straight away. They're not a flower that hides. They are generally on the top of the shrub or the tree, and they stand out. They stand out a mile. And it's not really the scent, although there is a scent with most of the Banksias that's quite sweet and quite delightful, but it's the flower. The flower is intense, and the leaves are nice and leathery and strong. They look like they could withhold a lot of drought kind of situations. It's a hardy looking plant. You know, the stem is strong. It looks like it could just go through a cyclone and be totally fine. And there's such a strength for me. That's what I feel. So when we look at all the Banksias together, there are common aspects to them. We're going to go through a few now, and then we'll talk about them later. So there's a strength, a rejuvenation, and uplifting energy, and it helps to kind of power through where there's stagnation, or when there's inertia, standing still, when there's fear, frustration, insecurity, general exhaustion. This is catalytic in its moving forward. It kind of packs a punch, these flowers, in a very solid, kind of reliable way. So these are the flowers that we'll be looking at in a little bit of detail. A couple from the Australian bushflower essences and a couple from the living essences. And the first one is Old Man Banksia. Now, in comparison to the flower that we just looked at, what do you notice about this flower? Its name even kind of has a connection with how this looks and how it feels. So we know that the flower has this strength. We know that the flower is really noticeable. We can see that the leaves are really leathery and tough. But there's like unusual nodules on this plant, on this flower. And there's a shagginess to it, and there's a grayness to it. And I'm actually reminded of some dogs, when they get older, they get like little nodules on their skin that you see through their shaggy fur, and that's what I tend to associate with Old Man Banksia. But it's always when they're much older. And you can see down the bottom on the drawing here, the botanical drawing, that those nodules are actually the seeds, how the seeds are released. And so as the name Old Man suggests, these tend to be solid, heavy people that are low in energy. So it's the tiredness that you associate with Old Man Banksia, but these are people who generally experience low energy on a day-to-day basis. And that's kind of their experience in life. And with that lack of energy comes a general weariness. Think about when you're really tired. It's hard to get enthusiastic about things in comparison to when you have loads of energy. And it's that sluggishness, it's that slowness, it's that lack of spontaneous joy and exertion and excitement that is the Old Man Banksia. And I often think about it with people who are having difficulties with weight loss, when there's obesity, or perhaps there's low thyroid activity, for example. They're kind of overweight and heavy and exhausted. And there's a frustration as well there, kind of being held back. So this is to bring about the energy. Remember that strength of the flower, the toughness of the flower. It's to bring back that spontaneity and enthusiasm and excitement and the oomph in life. And then there's Swamp Banksia. I think this is a stunning flower. That's me personally. You can see those leaves behind it. They're leathery and they're huge. And the flower is huge and it's really strong and it's quite, the colours in it are really, for me, like really dynamic, really like they stand out, they're a bit showy. I think it's a beautiful flower. And so swamp banksia is very similar to old man banksia in the tiredness aspect, the tiredness, the frustration from the tiredness. But old man banksia may be that they are kind of, that's a life kind of pattern where perhaps they're overweight or they have some sort of hormonal issue that's keeping them as that solid, plethoric kind of type. Swamp banksia, however, this may be just a temporary setback. You know, they're exhausted, they're low in energy, they feel world weary, they feel disheartened in general. And so this essence again helps to bring back that enthusiasm, the energy, the enjoyment, and the interest in life. So it brings back the spark. You can see that they're very similar in a lot of ways. And again, it's that cathartic change, it's that little shove in the right direction. This is the living essence, the first living essence. This is Menzies banksia. And that's a really beautiful flower, isn't it? Think of the colour there, the red aspect of Menzies banksia there. And that red is associated with energy. When we talked about the doctrine of signatures, we talked about red as being that fight or flight kind of response, as being that rush and surge of very physical energy. And so Menzies banksia is when you're kind of holding back from life, where there is a fear to really step out into who you are and to show that off in a lot of ways. And often that fear is from a painful past experience. And when that fear is kind of trapping the individual, holding them back, there's a lack of assumption that the future will be great, the future will be wonderful, will provide good experiences, because the past has brought painful experience. So kind of if that pain isn't healed, if it's left to fester, if it's left to continue in that fearful state, then it's like the person gets stuck in a time warp in that painful experience, and it just continues to perpetuate the fear and also the suspicion. So the suspicion that relationships will always end badly, or this painful experience, whatever it is, that's always going to happen. So this is about, again, that cathartic release of what's required, and then the regeneration, that kind of being that solid, moving, changing with the times kind of energy. And regeneration is a really interesting word there. If you think back to, the plant requires fire in order to propagate itself, in order to continue, in order to be born again, in order for new life to be born again. So that's an interesting correlation. And woolly banksia. So what's the first thing that you notice about woolly banksia? That the beauty of the colour, and of course the fluffiness, the woolliness, the softness, but the beauty of the colour. I mean, you have this kind of radiant bottom of yellow, golden yellow, and then this kind of opening of white. We talked about white being kind of purity and perhaps spirituality, but moving towards something greater. And the yellow and the gold is, you know, that enthusiasm and joy and fun. And so woolly banksia is basically about realizing a dream. So when people have in the past found failure after failure, there becomes a fear or trepidation in trying new things and setting new goals for this, pretty intense fear of failure. And with that can come a real loss of inspiration, because you're focusing on the fear rather than the possibility. You're focusing on the fear rather than the inspiration. And with that inspiration can come spontaneity, can come creativity, can come inspiration, new ideas, and it can kind of feed and perpetuate itself and create the enthusiasm needed. So that's the lesson here. You know, the belief that when you're on your path, when you're doing your thing, when you're doing what you're called to be doing, then there will be success in that. When you truly apply yourself, when you move through what's required, that will result in success. So it's that optimistic viewpoint, it's that idealism that's required to muster up the courage to realize your dream. And there's such vulnerability really in going after your dreams that a lot of people choose not to do it. And there's a lot of there seem to be, for some people, more cons than pros when it comes to chasing their dream. And so this is such an inspiring flower. There's a few other banksias from the Australite essences that I've just thrown in here because they cover a lot of the banksias. And again, these are about the strength that's required to move through obstacles in life. So this is one for kind of setting realistic standards and then moving forward. So very similar to woolly banksia in that it renews enthusiasm. And another banksia for encouraging and expressing freedom, encouraging strength, encouraging letting go of frustration, that sort of thing. This one is for physical energy. You can see that redness, or a physical kind of color. So what we have with the banksias is really such a strength and resilience to continue. Despite inertia, despite fear, despite things holding them back, this kind of moves through in a very catalytic way, just kind of helps to give the support and strength required to take that leap of faith that's required. And just noting some of the differences between the bush flowers and the living essences. Bush flowers really tended to focus a lot on the physical exhaustion, whereas the living essences tended to focus more on the mental. So that's just one of the differences. It'll be interesting to see if you picked up on more than that. The colour also was a difference there as well. There were very different colours within the bush flowers and living essences. Similar kind of shapes. So we talked a bit about this, that the strength really comes from the the shape of the flower, but also the plants and where they grow. So when we're talking about the doctrine of signatures, we talked about that the environment really needs to be taken into consideration when looking at a flower. You're not just looking at the flower, you're kind of taking a step back and seeing everything that influences that plant and how that may play into the energy of the plant. And now waratahs. These are such a unique looking flower, and I really like the generic name, meaning seen from afar. And if you've ever had the pleasure of seeing a waratah in the bush, you will know why this is the generic name. They're really such an incredible plant to just capture your eye. The deep crimson red, the shape of them, the way that they grow. When we're looking at the Banksias and we're looking at the waratahs, everything about the flower is kind of, the direction is up. When you look at the growth pattern and where the energy of the plant's going, the flower itself it's up. Everything is up. And so we think about that perhaps in terms of the energy as opposed to the Boronia, which was down facing. The waratahs are strength. Perhaps you could think of the masculine, particularly with the Banksias. It's quite a phallic symbol. And with that, you can think of the young principles, for example, the masculine principles, so that strength and courage and determination and going out and kind of the outward expression in life, the conquering aspect to the male component of human existence. And I'm not talking specifically about males and females here, I'm talking about the masculine and feminine within. And waratah is similar in that it's a really strong, really prominent flower. The color is incredibly strong. They stand out. They're kind of not afraid to stand out from the crowd. And we're going to just look at two here from the bush flower essences. So the first is waratah. Look at that flower. Seeing that in the bush is stunning. And the bush flower essence crew liken this in some ways to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Christianity or what on earth that means, it's if you've ever seen the pictures, or maybe you want to just quickly Google it, Jesus is depicted with his heart kind of on fire, and there's other symbolisms in there which have to do with the way that he died, and relating to dying for sins. But the fire is symbolic of the transformative power of divine love, and divine love, or unconditional love, or love from a higher place, a more enlightened place, maybe you want to say, however you think of that in your head. It is such a huge transformative power, and there is such strength and wisdom to come from consciously choosing to stay in unconditional love. The other aspect of this flower, aside from the thick stems and the tough leaves, there's a toughness to this plant, similar in a lot of ways to the Banksias, is that there are nice strong bracts underneath that flower, and it kind of looks like they're they're holding something with strength, something that's very precious, something that's very frail, and it's almost a nurturing kind of feeling, a protective kind of energy. And so Waratah is often used for where there's complete despair, for where there's blackness. There's the dark night on the soul, the black night on the soul. And also for when there's an inability to respond to a crisis situation. So when the survival mechanisms don't kick in, there's kind of a giving up, giving away. And so Waratah is all about courage and tenacity and strength and faith as well. And Waratah can be about the faith that you can make it through, that you'll see this incredibly difficult struggle through. Now remember, when you are seeing a client in this space of hopelessness and you're seeing kind of that deep depression, remember that there are multiple red flags that are waving for you, and that you need to be aware when it's appropriate to refer. In saying that, this may be an essence that you can give whilst referring on, if that's appropriate, if the person doesn't have an appropriate support network or diagnosis. And Ian talks a lot about this flower as being one of the strongest in his range. He talks about Waratah and Sturt Desert Pea as probably being the most quick acting, and it's really an essence that he suggests only using for a couple of days, if not a couple of hours. You know, it's kind of a once-off sort of remedy, and it has that strong, powerful shift in people. So here you could also consider suicidal tendencies. Of course, it would be remiss of you to give this flower and then say, okay, see you later, out the door. I just want to reiterate that's a really important red flag. And Mongol Waratah. This is an unusual looking plant, isn't it? For me, it almost looks like hands that are coming up, but they're kind of curling back in, almost like it's holding on to something. That's kind of what it looks like for me. Remember that there's this beautiful red color to this plant. This flower, this picture's a little bit washed out. So there's still that kind of tribal energy there. There's still the very physical aspect to this flower. But there's, it looks like it's a bit spread thin in comparison to the other ones, and it looks like hands grabbing out. Really, you take a moment to take it in and see what comes up. So Mongol Waratah, I'll just keep you looking at this picture so that you can see if that correlates to what you're feeling. Mongol Waratah is for codependent relationships where there's a neediness for another person, and when there's a lot of disempowerment, a lot of victim mentality stuff that comes up. There's a neediness here, and so it may be an addiction to another person, like a relationship, but of course it could be an addiction to anything that people find that they overly need in their lives. So it may be an addiction to substance abuse, for example. But it's a relationship with that other person or with that other thing, object, whatever it is. It's that victim stuff that Mongol Waratah is looking at. And to me, that's kind of that hand grabbing on. It's like it's got a hold of them. And so this flower, the positive aspects of it is, again, really catalytic. It creates change, but it's about empowerment. It's about understanding the strength of self to overcome adversity. And this empowerment, this taking responsibility for oneself, can be such an important component of the healing process. And sometimes it doesn't need to be just purely, they have a codependent relationship. Because in health, people can have unhealthy relationships with food, for example, and that may be really what you're dealing with, that there is dependency and a victim state around their relationship with something that is making them incredibly unhealthy. And so Mongol Waratah can give them that self-empowerment to move through the situation. An incredible gift. So, Waratahs, kind of in a nutshell, the similarities that, some of the similarities that may be very obvious are how dynamic these flowers are, the strength of these flowers, and the catalytic nature of these flowers in a similar way to Banksia's. There's a strength of will, resilience, courage, almost a faith there, and an intensity to healing shifts. These flowers act quickly. Mongol Waratah, of course, was for codependency. Waratah was for poor survival and coping mechanisms. So different flowers within that same plant family, but also they look different. And if you go back and have a look at the two different flowers and have a feel into them, what comes up, what are you reminded of, or what do you maybe feel intuitively is happening in those flowers, and then read again what they're for and see if it relates or doesn't relate. But both flowers, there's such a strength there, which is really beautiful. Look at that. There's an example of Waratah in the bush. It's hard to miss, isn't it?